Hello, everyone. We're on lesson 3 of 705 this week, and I'm about to dig into your posts to the question on toxic online behaviors last week. But this week's discussion prompt deals with information and power, and I happened across an article a couple days ago that I thought was apropos for the topic, and needing some just-in-time content to check in and make sure everything is okay with everyone else, I figured it would be a good opportunity to talk about it. So generally speaking, I'm sure if you're in a graduate class in a technology program at this point, you're probably well aware of the fact that you shouldn't get your technology news from mainstream media, which isn't to say that I'm casting dispersions on the state of mainstream media, but whenever you have niche topics, especially those that happen to be particularly technical, whether they're scientific in nature or something to do with technology, you're not going to get the best, or I should say the most accurate reporting on it, because those stories are for a wide consumer audience of mostly lay people, meaning that I'm not sure I've ever come across any scientific or technical topic that was reported in mainstream media that wasn't incorrect in some fashion or another, or at least reductive to the point of being incorrect in some fashion or another. So, again, you probably are already aware of that. So generally when I'm getting my science or technology news, I'll go to different sources, more niche sources that cater more to those topics, because they're going to be more fully explained. There's a greater assumption that the reader base has some prior knowledge in the subject beforehand. But I did come across something in PsyPost, which is generally, at least in my estimation, to be a pretty good source when it comes to news on psychology or coming studies or anything like that. But in this case, I consider it to be something of a bit of a miss. And the reason that I believe so is because, while PsyPost generally will report on, again, papers and news related to psychology and coming studies, this particular topic strays just a bit outside their normal vein and strays into the area of data science, data information, and a little bit into technology as well. So the article, as you see here, is how people attribute information they find online to their own memory instead of the internet. So, and this is not necessarily a clickbait article, but it does kind of speak to a common sentiment that's often found in clickbait articles these days, which is, you know, the old person shaking their fist at the sky. You know, back in my day, I tied an onion to my belt, which was the custom at a time, kind of a thing. You know, the whole a Google search is not the same thing as knowing something kind of debate. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but I am saying that it is, at least when I've seen it commonly expressed, far overblown, because it ignores the path that knowledge takes to be acquired, which is to say that in the pyramid of knowledge, you have data, information, knowledge, and then wisdom. And it is a pyramid, meaning that each level is built upon the other. You can't get information without data. You can't have knowledge without information. You can't gain wisdom without knowledge. It's simply impossible any other way. That is the route that things take. And there are certain axioms of each of those levels, too, that we have to keep in mind along the way, and we will cover that in this course. So I'm not going to fully explain it here in some just-in-time content. But the sentiment that a Google search is not the same thing as knowing something ignores the fact that a Google search will provide you with information, and you must have information in order to gain knowledge. But my real problem with this article didn't come just from that, because that's a fairly minor complaint, although minor complaints, I'm well versed in those. My problem with it came from the article itself. So if we read down a little bit, and I'll share this link if you would like to read it for yourself. Essentially what they're reporting on here is an experiment that was conducted, well, several experiments that were conducted, where they take what is essentially marketing material for Google and put it to the test. So Google, or the Alphabet Corporation, has positioned itself on the internet as being a one-stop source for all information aggregation, whether that content be text, images, video, or what have you. They've, over the course of 20, it's not quite 20 years yet, but over the course of about 20 years or so, have positioned themselves to be, that one source of information. Their marketing material then is essentially explaining or purporting that Google is like a third. So this is precisely a quote. Apparently, it's in the article and it's around quotes. According to Sergey Brin, that Google is the third half of your brain. So I'm not going to dissect that too much because there's so much wrong with it. But the way that they decided to put this to the test in these experiments was essentially to ask a group of volunteers general knowledge questions, both with or without Google as a crutch. And according to the exit results of these experiments, they measured what they call cognitive self-esteem, which is not a term in the article that is around quotes, but sure as shit ought to be. So cognitive self-esteem, which was measured on a scale. And the results of that scale essentially showed that those who were able to use Google as a crutch for answering general knowledge questions rated their ability in answering these questions to be higher than those who didn't have it. And they inferred, based upon these responses, that the survey participants were attributing the information that they found on Google to their own memory. Obviously, there's some real serious problems with making that inference, because that, to me, as somebody who's familiar cyber-sociologically with the way that we consume and convert information, are two things that don't follow each other. Of course, you're going to rate your ability to answer questions higher when you have access to all of the world's repository of information. Why wouldn't you feel better about answering questions when you have access to that information? There's nothing about the results, at least as far as I can see, that actually show that the participants are saying, oh yes, I was able to answer this question. It also kind of ignores one of the major axioms of the data to information conversion in the data, information, knowledge, and wisdom trajectory of knowledge, which is that a person being able to find the answers, knowing where to go and being able to find them efficiently and quickly, is a very important part of the process and is a measure of knowledge, right, in some respects, right? Because we live in an era where searching is so very easy that, maybe it becomes easy for so many of us to forget what it's like to, number one, not know something, but also not know where to go to find it. Because it's just so easy for us to access information in this day and age. But that feeling is completely different than when you try to search for something and nothing comes up. So think about it this way, particularly with small children who don't have access to, again, a terminal to the internet in their pocket, every second of every day, with the ability to access information on command. You don't know something, you don't know where to go to find it, you don't have any ability to find it. That will, of course, hurt, I guess, what we could call, again, with the huge air quotes around it, cognitive self-esteem. But it is a certain feeling of helplessness, right? Not everybody is going to be able to make inferences based upon existing knowledge. Not everyone will have a base of existing knowledge upon which to make inferences. So I guess it could be said to hurt some form of self-esteem. Now compare that to the problem of having a repository of information and not having the tools, skills to actually search that repository and find useful information. Now, what sort of emotions does that kind of elicit? Well, it's going to elicit feelings more of frustration, but they're going to be external frustration. Very rarely will we become frustrated with ourselves. We'll instead become frustrated with the tool. It's the tool that's not giving us the information we need, not ourselves. So you could say that that is an externalization of those emotions, and so therefore leads to less cognitive self-esteem erosion, again with huge air quotes, because I don't even understand what their definition of cognitive self-esteem is supposed to be. nor the distinction between cognitive self-esteem and what other kinds of self-esteem would there be, I suppose. I'm not even going to sit here and guess, because that would just be bad. So, the inference that they're making here, essentially, that this ability to search for information leads to higher cognitive self-esteem, which itself means that they're attributing the information to their own memory in experiment 1. I'm not sure you can honestly make that kind of inference. I don't see how they can. I don't see it at all. Now, one last thought I had on this before we part here for this lesson. Is that we also can't forget, of course, that in that trajectory of information, that sense of cognitive self-esteem, which let's call that more of an assurance, right? That information that we're getting is accurate, is completely the result of whatever search tools are being used. And while we might feel frustration when a tool fails to provide us with information, very rarely do we consider whether or not the information that we are provided is accurate. So I do wonder if they had actually continued this experiment using their own logic, what their cognitive self-esteem would look like if they answered 10 general knowledge questions using an information repository or a search engine like Google. But then the information that after these general knowledge questions were scored and they were told the results, how they would feel if it turned out that more than half of the information that they had found had been false. Or even if they were questions that we could compare that. I think that would be an interesting comparison using their own logic, and probably speaks more to whatever they're trying to say here in these experiments than the ones that were actually conducted with the methodology that I'm seeing in the article here. So if we had 2 groups, 10 general knowledge questions, one with a repository, they answer them and they succeed or fail based upon their pre-existing information. We have another group, 10 general knowledge questions, and they pass or fail largely based upon not just their pre-existing information, but also their ability to search it in an information repository that is unreliable. And if one group does more than the other, or does better than the other, rather, how that would affect their cognitive self-esteem. Because I think that is at least a valid sort of question that might be interesting to answer, if nothing else. Well, I'm sure that all of you are going to have some of your own ideas on this, so do feel free to include that in this week's discussion if you'd like. I'm always interested in reading what everybody has to say on all of these matters. I'm going to dig into Lesson 2 discussion now. Look forward to reading that and responding. Please do contact me if there's any problems, questions, or concerns. More than happy to help if I can. And we will see you soon. I may do a second just-in-time video this lesson, just because it's the summer and we're on an accelerated schedule, and I want to make sure that I'm checking in regularly with you guys. Okay, thanks.